Metabolic V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
Hey guys. Hey friends.
I mean, we obviously have to repeat stuff. There's no way we can not just say the same things that have just been said.
So everyone, we are recording. Well, first of all, so it's Steven, myself, and Danika joining us this week. Super exciting.
Yeah.
And it's Hurricane Day. So we were talking to Steven because Danika and I are far away from hurricanes, but Steven has one headed directly at him. Somehow you pissed off Milton. What'd you do?
No. First of all, Tampa's Indian burial grounds reign supreme. It's not directly hitting Tampa. Once again, thanks. But we're due. It's been so long since we've had a storm kind of really hit that central western Florida.
You're saying 2004 was is that the last time you guys were hit in a big way?
No, I mean, I think Irma was the last time we were hit in a big way. I think that was 18 or 19. It might have even been 17. And that still wasn't a direct hit, but because of how big and the storm was, I know we were out we had no power for 2.5 weeks.
Oof.
In the summer, which blew. But I mean, and that's okay, cool. This is an inconvenience. That doesn't talk about the other storms that have hit the Panhandle or South Florida that have absolutely devastated. Because I think people don't recognize it. They think of this now they're thinking of the storm surge with Helene, which was insane. Wow, I've never seen anything like that. This one's supposed to be worse. It looks like it's going to go south of Tampa. So where I'm at, we'll get a lot of wind and rain. So I'm pretty, I don't know, I want to say I'm 30, 40 miles north of Tampa. And I'm still going to be seeing probably 100-mile-an-hour winds at my house for gusts, that kind of stuff. I think it said 18 inches of rain.
Damn.
In some spots up to, which is wild. So, but where the storm's actually hitting, which is the Sarasota area, it looks like you're talking about it's going to be right on that line for a Cat 4. So you're talking definitely 100-mile-an-hour winds. That tears stuff up. So you're talking trees down, power lines down, people's roofs going, RVs and trailers just going wherever they're going to go. And then all that because there's a ton of debris out there too. Yeah. So people think hurricane, broken windows and stuff. Normally what breaks your windows in the hurricane is a piece of debris that gets thrown into it. It's not necessarily just the wind itself being so strong. So a lot of people are going to have a lot of damage from that kind of stuff too, because there's still all this crap outside of people's houses from the floods all along the coastline and places that flooded that they're just going to get picked up and thrown at other buildings and houses and stuff.
Yeah, I saw a video this morning where it's from before Helene, where they were showing they had a river down below their house, but they were don't worry, we're 30 feet above the river, and the highest it's ever gotten is 10 feet, and it's about 10 feet high right now. And so they're showing it, and it's a fast river, and it looks bad, and they're but we'll be fine. 24 hours later, the water was underneath their window ledge. And as you watch the video, an entire fucking roof goes by.
Yeah.
And it's just how fast it happens is just so unbelievable that it can go from everything's fine to the whole world's ending. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I think the good news is because I live and I go over 75 all the time. 75 was bumper to bumper as far as I could see, pretty much all day long the past day and a half of people going north and getting out. So I think most of the people on the coastline were smart enough to understand that, all right, that's not something that you're going to make it through, and you just need to leave and go somewhere else and come back and pick up whatever's left at that point.
Yeah.
So that I'm that's cool to see, because as Floridians, we literally don't really give very many shits about hurricanes. I've been doing this for 30 plus years. I've been through a whole bunch of them. I was through Charlie, through Irma. I've seen all the rest of them. And you're like, all right, well, if it's just the storm, as long as you're not in a flood zone, like that's really what you have to worry about is the flooding and stuff. Unless
Yeah.
you're like really on that track. But I think a lot of people just left, which is cool, except for any of my family.
They're all
So
holding
my
on the fort.
100% because my mom's in Pinellas. So Pinellas is like that little wiener dong on the far side of Tampa Bay that's on the water. And then my grandma's in Sarasota, fairly-ish close, so not in flood zone, but not super far from the coastline over there. And they're both like, nah, we're staying. I was like, you guys can come here. Like, it's cool. We
Right.
got room. And they're like, nah, we're staying home. I was like, oh, okay. And my uncle's house
Yeah.
is probably going to be destroyed.
Oh Lord. Well, I'll be bugging you, checking in to see.
Yeah.
First thing this
Don't bug
morning,
me.
I was like, Steven, how are you?
It's an overnight thing. Go to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll just say nothing for the next day so everyone thinks I'm dead.
That's not
Or I'm
good.
not going to
Don't do
respond to
that.
anything
That's
at all.
torture.
oh, and he would just like to be funny and just disappear. We're like, wait, Steven. Okay, so
What are we actually supposed to be talking about?
right. No, I literally had to go back to my notes to get us back there. So we were going to talk today a little bit about self-compassion. And I think it's one of those things that I think sometimes people can be really good with self-compassion when it comes to like, I've deserved this and like things like that.
Beat yourself.
And then in other situations, find it very difficult to use it when it might be super helpful. And so because we've got Danika, we might as well jump into something wonderful like this. And so how did that like jump out at you, Danika, with like when we were talking different options with the self-compassion one?
So that one is something I talk to I would say 100% of my clients about is just giving yourself grace or being able to zoom out and look at the big picture of things and not feel like sometimes I feel like the detail orientation of stuff we can get kind of trapped in there sometimes and then beat ourselves up if the details aren't perfection and we can't zoom out and see bigger picture. Am I progressing or am I doing okay? Like we can't give ourselves grace sometimes when we're so detail oriented. Detail orientation is wonderful to some extent, not to the extent of like when you're just a perfectionist and then you're beating yourself up when like every little thing isn't happening the way that you want it. Another reason why that stood out to me is because I have had some clients say, I applied the whole give myself grace and like completely just graced over everything.
Right.
Like I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to give myself grace. I don't feel like going to the gym. I'm going to give myself grace. I don't feel like toning. I don't feel like doing this. Like I'm going to give myself grace. And then you have to kind of reel it in and be like, well, like, you know, self-compassion with everything, there should be like a dose appropriate.
Yes.
Like everyone has a certain dose that works for him or her and figure out your dosage amount and what's supposed to be like good for that season you're in. And being able to kind of reel people in a little bit when I'm like, well, that's not what I meant by giving you grace. But that's why. So both of those angles of like when people are too harsh on themselves and then when people take the grace way too far where it's not working out for them.
Graced over. I like
Graced
it.
over.
Woof.
Yeah, graced over. Like
They're just loving Elvis. They're in Graceland.
just really like really just given permission to do everything and anything. And that is, yeah, I always tell my clients, like, listen, you're in charge of your dials, right? So if you have like a grace dial, like give myself grace, or you have I'm going to push through the muck, or I'm going to get through, like, I'm going to persevere. Like all of those are kind of dials and you need to figure out like where are your dials lined up and is like the frequency where you want it to be and does it align with like the goals that you have in your journey, whatever that may be. Because sometimes I find that there are many people who like I said, are too into the details. And so if I say, hey, I need you to step away for a second. If you were to look back, tell me for the week, were you able to get movement in? Were you able to hydrate your body? Did you have like overall good workouts? And tell me like week wise, what does that look like? And when they look at the week and zoom out, then they're able to be like, oh yeah, actually, like I did really well. And I'm like, yeah, so this would be giving yourself grace. Or if things don't go exactly how you plan and you're like beating yourself up because life happened, like how is that purposeful? How does that work for you? Did it like help you to get through like the rest of the day? Probably not. So your dial was way out of frequency. Like it just was way turned up and it wasn't right. So you need to like program it to a way that it works best for you.
So, I mean, I feel like that's where, because I think a lot of people will like see the topic or hear it and be like, triggered. Ah, no, because if you're from I guess you guys are both from my generation, right? We were like, I was taught, hey, whatever happens to you, it's probably kind of your fault. You either put yourself into a situation or you had the wrong people around or like you just made bad
Like,
you
how
made
do
bad
you fuck this
decisions,
up?
dude.
Yeah.
Right? Like you chose to stay on the beach during a Cat 4 hurricane. Like, and I'm like, okay. Because I think there's validity to that. But I also think there's validity to the fact that like there are a lot of things that happen to us that aren't our faults.
Mhm.
And I feel like because I know when I saw this, I was like, I'm like, I got a little triggered. I was like, the
Yeah.
grace conversation, even though I tell people to give them grace all the time. I got like 2 other clients that both checked in today. They're in the Bay Area. I was like, you got to understand if things might not be perfect this week, and that's probably going to be okay because hurricane, power outages, all the rest of the stuff. And at the same point as I'm saying, hey, you need to be able to give yourself grace over the things that you can't control. I'm like, but I also want you to have accountability over the reasonable things that you can control.
Yes.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's where like this one gets lost for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Is too many people give themselves grace for just choosing things that don't put them in a good position versus like, okay, stuff happened to me. Or if I'm going to choose that, yeah, I mean, cool, I'm going to own that and I'm going to take responsibility. And that's my thing. I chose to make that decision. So if I have a consequence because of that decision, I'm not going to beat myself up for it, but I'm also not going to make excuses for it.
Yeah.
Like I could have done something different.
Right. I feel like the big difference is like where people can get more out of it is like kind of where Danica covered it. Like, are we just using it as an excuse to be like, well, I need to give myself grace, so I'm just not gonna, versus saying, okay, I went in, I showed up. It wasn't the best workout of my life, but like something happened. Or like, with this week, maybe people don't have time to take care of their house and like all of that stuff. Like I saw Ben with his meal prep, right? Because he's in prep for a show. And so he took the time to get all of his shit ready for this weekend, and like nothing's going to throw him off. He's going to be ready to go. But maybe people can't do all of that, but they made sure to have like protein on hand.
So
And
let me interject right here. So Ben's still a little bit further up north too, right? So he's a little bit further away from where the worst of the hurricane stuff's going to be. So I think that's like a realistic and reasonable thing for him to do.
Yeah.
If you're in Sarasota, I think that's a completely different situation.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, anyone I've talked to where they're like, it's coming. I'm like, why are you still there? Like, go. And I told my clients, we're not changing a damn thing if you get relatively close. Awesome. But I'd just like you to survive this week. And like, let's talk next week about what happens. But like, so that even you bringing that point up about Ben though, like he might not even get hit. Like stuff might not even happen, like to a certain extent. And he still was like, well, I'm not going to take any chances. I'm going to get it done. So that's one very like end of the spectrum. The other end would be people being like, well, I'm evacuating. I have to drive 12 hours. And so we're going to stop and get all of the fast food I want along the way. And like, let's see what candy I can find in the gas station. And then they're like, I'm going to give myself grace. This is a scary situation. Now we've gone full to the other end where really we're just using it as an excuse to say, fuck it and do exactly what we want. And I think like that middle ground is a skill, like Danica was saying, with where you figure out what is today's balance, like what can I handle and what dials need to be up and which ones go down. And I mean, so even this weekend, like with my race, like I went in with, I had like plan A through D of what I was hoping would happen. And it was just like, okay, well, if one is going to be achieved, plan A was the easiest one, where it was just cover 31 miles, like whether or not there's anyone left there to find me, like let's cover the distance today. Then I was like, let's cover it within what they want me to do it. And then like had other goals from there. And for me, it was something where like my coach had told, like, she almost didn't want to set up a plan for the day, because I am very much the type of person that if the one I really, really wanted doesn't work out, I get super emotional. I'll still push myself through it. I will not have an ounce of fun. Like after that point, from then on, I hate it. I'm mad. And what was the point? And like everything like that. And so that's what, like, why I was excited about this, because it was new territory and it was just like, who fucking knows? Let's just see what happens. And like, so that like the grace part's been a huge skill that I've had to try and work on, because I'm not very good at it for myself. I can give it to everybody else. For me, it's like, well, you're the idiot that made the goal, so you better just do it. Like,
You brought up a really good thing though. I think sometimes it's important to check ourselves and say, well, a couple of things. What are my controllables, and can I put energy into my controllables, and can I just accept my uncontrollables? Because we can't control, unless we have magical power, that a hurricane is coming. Like that just probably won't be something we can do unless we figure that out. And then another thing is to remember, grace is not the same as having an excuse wrapped up and disguised as grace. It's just not. So like, I will say to my clients, if like so a client wakes up and cannot, like, is throwing up, and like that's something that it happened, they got sick, and they're like, I think I'm going to take it easy today. That's a reasonable give myself grace, because they're able to say like, what are my controllables? Well, I can just make myself better. Like I can get myself better. I'm in control of that so that I don't prolong this sickness. But if someone wakes up and they're like, I think I'm a little achy and like, I'm okay, but I just don't feel like it, but I'm going to give myself grace. I'm going to listen to my body. Well, then I'll ask them, like, is that just an excuse? Because what can't you do and what can you do? And can you not prep your meals because like you're a little stuffle, like you have sniffles? Well, no, you can still prep your meals. Like you can still do all of that. Can you get some fresh air and sunshine if like you're blowing your nose a little extra today? Probably. So like you can still do those things. Those aren't, I can't do that. I can do that. I'm just choosing not to do that. And that doesn't equate to giving grace. And I can be hard. I think it's important to challenge ourselves in that sense, like to be able to say, am I just choosing not to, or can I literally can't?
Because if you have a tummy ache, I mean, the world is ending. Nothing can happen at that point. But
Right.
sniffles, totally doable for a lot of things.
Right. You can sniffle your way through anything.
And anybody who doesn't find that funny is obviously not married, because as soon as you're married, as soon as the husband has a tummy ache, the world is over.
Then forget
the
it.
sniffles for that matter.
I do all right with the sniffles. The tummy ache.
I would also say that a lot of this too, you really need to kind of be aware of your own self and how much, like, what is your ability to understand the whole grace versus excuse type of thing, and be able to understand, am I manipulative so much so that it's at the expense of achieving my goals? Like, so are you good at it, or are you just very manipulative in your own mind, and like you can come up with some lame ass excuses and wrap them up in a tight little bow and send it to your coach? Like, probably not the best. So if you know that about yourself, you should check that about yourself.
That's
So-
why I love using the little spreadsheet. And like, I'll have people put notes to it where it's like, if we didn't hit shit the way that we had planned to, like, let's put Y like to the side. And then that way we can see week after week after week where it's like, okay, if we have 5 or 6 days where there's something that threw us off, and we're trying to change the plan and you're like, no, 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 I can do it. Then it's like, no, we got to shift something. Like,
Yeah. And extreme ownership, that's
oh,
one, I
love
love that book. I think everybody should read
Yes.
it.
So good.
But I think too, like taking ownership for things and saying to yourself, like I've said to my clients, if I've seen a pattern and I can now have that comfortable conversation, or maybe for them uncomfortable, of you've been mentioning a few weeks that like life has happened and you've been giving yourself grace every week. How's that working out for you? Like, how's that? Is it working? Is it like a tool we can use? Because it doesn't seem like it's working out anymore. And like now we're just manipulating the grace tool. So I don't think we're applying it in the way that we want to. So we need to start to take ownership for our actions and realize like we are also, we're in control of a lot of these things. And now we're just choosing not to make the right choices.
Yeah, but I feel like if you don't, so like the self-compassion is like step 2, 3, whatever, because if you can't have the self-realization about like where you're at, what your actions are doing and how that's impacting things, then it's very hard to be compassionate with yourself, like to the correct degree, because you're either going to overdo it or underdo it. You're either going to beat the crap out of yourself, or you're just going to give yourself a nice fluffy pillow life, right? With good feels. Because at a certain point, I have to be like, all right, okay, I want to train this many days a week. All right, great. Well, I'm always hurt. Well, but I really like training this many days a week. Okay, well, obviously something's happening there. I need to be able to take a step back, try and remove my emotions from that, and say, okay, is this serving me or is it hindering me?
Yeah.
And I think the exercise is like a non-emotional example of that for most people. There's definitely some people that they're like, absolutely not, I can't exercise less. All right, that's probably a problem. But I think the big one I see a lot of is food. And I'm gonna be real honest, it's dieting all the time. It's the amount of restriction. They're like, oh yeah, well, normally when I go into a diet, I just go on 800 or 900 calories a day. And I'm like, all right, well, that sounds like a problem to me. If you were to hear somebody else say they were eating only 800 calories a day, like, would you think that's enough for them? And they're like, probably not. So why is it okay for you? Oh, that's a good question. And you're not losing weight on that anymore, right? No. And you feel like trash all the time, right? Yeah. But you want to keep doing that and you want me to diet you more. Yeah. Like, what?
I can do it. Whatever you need me to do, I can totally do it. Right? Like,
Like,
that's what it
yeah,
always comes with.
like peace, love, power, whatever, chicken grease support. But at a certain point, we have to be able to take that step back and be honest with ourselves. Wait, and I'll be on, like, I feel like for a lot of people that can be hard because depending who you surround yourself with and the kind of people you have in your life, you might just have a lot of people that just justify you all the time and say everything you think is right, all your feelings are justified and good, everything you do is beneficial, you're just the best human being ever. And I'm like, nah, dude, sorry. Like, nope.
Mhm.
So people have a hard time with even that self-actualization on what they're doing and how it's impacting them.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have had talks about like saying how people need, like, some people just need a bit more like shame. I feel like. And I mean, that's where so I'll laugh sometimes where people will be like, how do you get like all this stuff done or something? And I'll be like, oh, it's a pretty good dose of ADHD and imposter syndrome. And you put them together and you're fucking unstoppable because you never feel good enough and you have 100 projects going on. And so you just end up working really hard thinking eventually something will work. And like, sometimes I just want to shake people. I'm like, don't you just want to see what you can do just for the fucking sake of it, and like try something different. And it doesn't, I feel like where that comes with like the self-compassion thing is like they'll see what other people are doing or how other people are getting results and be like, well, that must be the fucking way. And so I just have to keep doing it. They'll keep doing the 900 calorie diet, but it worked before. And it's like, but it's not working now. And so like find a different thing to chase. Like find something at least a little bit more interesting for a while and like go that route. Because I mean, just how sad would it be if we're just wasting like 15 years trying to get to like a number we've never weighed before because somebody told us we should or something. And yeah, that's my soapbox is I just want people to find like more interesting things to try to work on beyond trying to copy the same things that they're saying or seeing or trying all the time that just aren't working for them right now.
Yeah. And it's also okay to pivot on your goals, right? Like this goes along with giving yourself grace, but
I love the pivot.
I love pivoting. It's like
I
most
wish
amazing skill.
I wish you would say quit sometimes. Like I thought like pivot's such a positive way to say it. Like, okay, we're gonna pivot and we're gonna go focus on this. Like sometimes you should just quit that thing you're doing, and that's not a bad thing all the
You want me
time.
to say
Even
quit?
if
But like,
own-
but people have
Sometimes
such a
I
bad
feel
association
people
with
should
it. It's
quit.
so weird, right?
Yeah.
They
It
hate
is
that
a nice
word.
way to put it though, where it's like, well, I didn't stop, I didn't quit my prep. I pivoted in a different direction. I mean,
We talked about that, and Stephen, I'll say quit if you want me to. You want me
Nah,
to say
I was just thinking out loud. Sorry, man.
it?
it's like the grace of the moment. Like you're still getting to do it, but you get to call it something nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I say because I say pivot because that doesn't mean you can't go back to it. Like you can, and I guess if you quit, it doesn't mean that either. But pivot just means like, I don't know, going in a different direction.
Like you're not
Just
stopping.
you're not stopping. You're
hurting.
continuing the motion in whatever way you want. You're just going in a different motion.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is important to be able to give yourself grace in those moments and be able to say like, hey, isn't working for me. And so that's okay. I can just shift, quit, change, pivot, whatever you want to say, and go into a different direction that is better for me now. And give yourself grace with that, because I find that to actually be more powerful than banging your head against the wall, frustrated at yourself, mad that it's not working, like not seeing that it's just not fitting for you, and not being. I see it powerful and strong when we're able to recognize those things and to be able to say like, okay, this isn't working right now. This isn't for me at this moment. So I'm going to stop this and shift over here to a different direction that probably will work a little bit better for me. That is part of giving yourself grace. And sometimes I feel people really struggle with that. Like I have to say to my client, like, hey, no one's telling you that you have to get 5 times a week. Like you have to, or else if it's not working in your schedule right now, what works better in your schedule? And then it's like I lifted up this huge weight off their shoulders and they're like, oh my gosh, this feels so much better. I'm like, yeah, wouldn't you want to do that? Like, it's okay. Like, that's okay to give yourself grace that it's not working out and to be able to recognize, like, I can just like move a little bit.
That makes me think of people pivoting away from competing and like
Yes.
how hard that can be, where like you kind of have everything tied into like I'm this competitor who has seasons where I'm prepping or not, and like different things like that. And especially if they're like deep into the community. And so then you're seeing it on like social media and you're seeing your friends hop into preps, because that's always the hard part, right? When you have somebody into, maybe they're not even like going away from it, but like you're going to do an extended off season or something. And then the season will pick up and you're like, no, like unfollow everybody. Don't get excited just because everyone else is shredded. That doesn't change what we're doing right now. And I think that can be hard when someone's maybe saying like I have a client right now who like life has just hit her and like a bunch of different things that made it so like we had been planning for 2025 to be our year where we would prep again. And it's been like a year and half, 2 years since our last show, something like that. So like we were working towards this and like had plans. And then she's having to show up for family members, like work things changed. The entire landscape of her days and our ability to control workout hours and all of that shifted. And it was like, well, we can either spend time being pissed off about that and get real mad about it and pout about it for some time, or we can like settle into those feelings real hard, like at the beginning, and then move on from it. Because the only thing it's going to change is like ruining everyone's day for the next however long that you continue to be pissed off about it. Because like this is what it is now. So we can either try to make it work. And like if somebody is like, I don't care how hard it's going to be, I'm going to find a way to do this. Cool. Like, let's run with it. We'll figure it out. But if they're already having the gut feeling of like, this is going to be hellacious, then it's like, then why?
No.
Yeah. Like, then let's not do that. We can still lean on the basics of all of that. Just like you said, with like reducing the number of days that we're doing stuff, like the commitment that we're giving it, but still honor that that's an important part of us, that like, that has meaning, but you could just kind of like dial it down, and then we have to dial up the life part of things. Just figure out how to make it work.
I feel like people have a hard time dialing that down though, because and I think the competitor thing, right, is because there's so much identity like
Right.
lined up and encompassed in that. It's such an overwhelming thing. Oh, I have to be on my macros all the time. I have to go to the gym all the time. I have to and for a lot of people, then they try and like make it a business. So then I got to post on social media and I got to do this and I got to present it so in a way so everybody thinks that. And I'm like, that's a ton. So it becomes their identity. And for a lot of people, I think they forget who they were before that. And so transitioning out of the prep mindset of I'm always prepping, or I'm a competitor, this, that, can be really difficult for people because like, okay, for me, I'm a competitor, okay, but I'm also a musician and I also do jujitsu and I'm also a this and I'm also a that. And I like, there's this whole list of things that I am. And like, if I'm being honest, being a bodybuilder is pretty far down the list at this point. For a lot of people, when they're really living that life hard, it's like the first thing. And for some of them, it's the only thing. And so that grace thing, I think of in a similar way, where if I think about who I am and part of my identity, I'm kind of a ball buster and a hard ass, right? Like, let's be real. So, like, giving other people grace, I'm okay with, and I can do that to a point. I'm obviously not the most gracious person ever, but giving myself grace, different story, because I see myself as this kind of person. It's part of my identity. And so that makes it harder for me to appropriately adjust that, man, I really didn't have any control over this stuff versus no, like this is my position and I have to make sure these things are handled.
Yeah. That I know that we had an episode about, I think we did, but maybe we should revisit that about identity. But I think it is important to have that kind of internal conversation too. When you feel misalignment with anything and it just doesn't feel like it's working very well, then like have an open conversation with yourself. That doesn't mean you're crazy. I mean, maybe it is, but having that conversation with yourself is worth it, because then you can really start to kind of weed out like, where's this misalignment happening? And do I want to continue to kind of just feel this like weirdness, like disconnect as I persevere to this goal? Or because you'll know when it's working and you'll know when it's not working, right? Like, and I think we need to like tune into that a little bit more, and to make it forcefully work. Typically you don't get the best results that you want to have. You might like get results, but probably not the best that you want to have, or at least your happiness or emotional state or mental well-being probably won't be the best, right? So probably will be a more difficult transition out as well. And for competitors, I have even experienced that where like my entire identity, that was who people knew me as. And that was it. Like, it was just like, oh, Danika, like she competes and that's it. And like, it became my everything. She preps her meals. She does workouts. She's intense, da, da, da. And like, that didn't align well with who I was. So now, even if I do think about like, if I want to compete again, if I like get that little itch, I have to have an honest conversation with myself and be like, well, what am I doing right now in my lifestyle? I really like having a nice tequila drink now and then. And like, that probably doesn't fit. And I don't know if I want to give that up right now. Like, I really like not tracking or not having to like have like a certain amount of cardio to do, or like I would have to measure everything out. I really don't like that as much anymore. So like, am I okay with sacrificing that in order to like persevere a certain goal? And does that align well with like the life that I have right now? I think people jump into things without looking at like their landscape first.
Yeah.
And then they may jump in thinking landscape is okay, right? And then they jump in and landscape, like you said, Christina, changes. And then you have to have another conversation like, okay, things don't feel pretty aligned right now. I need to have a conversation, whether it be with my coach, with myself, with my family, like have a meeting, set it up, and then make sure what you're doing is okay. Is that kind of the path that you want to continue to go on? And it's okay to not choose that path at any point in time.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is like when going through all of these decisions, I know I'm somebody who will make rash decisions, like make emotional ones, and that like give yourself the time to sit through it, like for like a minute. And like, that's where my husband is good at like trying to slow things down. He'll be like, okay, sleep on it or something when it comes to things, because I know like things like last spring when I smashed the shit out of my foot and like broke that bone, and I was 6 or 7 weeks out from my race, and like it felt very much like the end of the world. Like it's been months and months that I've been working on this, and now this happens. How am I going to make this work? I couldn't even put a shoe on for 2 weeks and stuff. And part of me wanted to email like race directors and my coach and stuff and be like, well, I'm done. And we'll see that in the transformation challenge. It always happens. It's the same thing. It'll be like a toe or a rolled ankle or something like that, where it's not necessarily the end of the world, but it's definitely shitty, and it's definitely affecting your day to day, where you feel less confident in your ability to do things. And like, well, it's over now. It's all done for me. And it's like, wait, like if we don't let our emotions devour us right now, and then we take a second to really figure out, if you were talking to somebody else who was like, this means the world to me that I see these 12 weeks or like whatever it is through to the end, I have to prove this to myself, this thing just happened, then you'd sit down with them and find a way to make shit work. You'd probably break it down into smaller chunks than trying to see like the whole plan in front of you and things like that. And like, we have to give ourselves that space. Like the thing we brought up like a ton throughout this is how we can talk to clients about it. We can talk to friends about it and all of that and offer it to them. And then when it comes to ourselves, we can be a little bit shittier about it, and just finding that way to have that conversation. I don't think it's crazy. I mean, some people feel better writing it down. Like I've had clients do that, where I'm like, write all of the things in your head, all the mean things that you have to say, go write them down. And then
Too
see
much.
if you would say that to like anybody else, you know? And, or sometimes you'll catch yourself on your bullshit where you write it and you're like, okay, no, I probably could have, done better. And
I couldn't imagine writing down all the negative things I have to say about myself. It's too much. It's way too much.
Maybe you should probably practice that.
That's why I avoid therapy, honestly. I'm not ready yet to be so good at it.
I find that stuff to be awesome. I like, only because I think I would feel horrible if I didn't practice what I preach. So like, if I was just continuing to tell people like, you should do this tool, you should do this tool, but I've never done it to myself, like, I don't like that. I would feel a certain way and then I would talk bad about myself. So I have done all those things and been like, whew, that's a lot. Like, okay, you need to check yourself here, here, and be able to recognize like what you're doing on a daily basis and how you're talking to yourself, how you're a little too hard or a little too soft, whatever it may be, and be able to own your shit. Because at the end of the day, no one is probably going to do it for you. So you got to be able to own your shit yourself. And then if you want to progress, like in any area of life, right? Like, then, and yet people are probably going to say, well, how much grace should we give? Or like, how much toughness should we give? It's all dependent on you. Like, Christina's probably going to say all of it. Give it all. Give all the
I was
toughness.
like, well, more than you think, probably.
And you're absolutely right. Probably more than you think. But for others, you probably need to tone it down a notch because it sounds horrible. You would never say that to other people. And everyone is going to be different in how they like manage it. But you need to understand how you do it and how you work and operate your best.
Right.
And that's on you with the help and guidance of like your coach and other people giving you a little bit of like a different perspective or a different like, hey, did you notice that you said this in your check-in multiple times? Or have you noticed that like this is a repetitive trend for you? And every single check-in, you're just like, well, another horrible week, haven't lost a pound. This is shitty. I am horrible. I suck at life. Like, if you're not going to call yourself out on it, we're probably going to do it for you, but then we're going to pass it back to you. We're not going to be like, oh, thank you for the bullshit. Let me work for it. And like, I'll make it pretty and send it back. No. Thank you for the bullshit. We need to work on this.
So I think it's important to understand also that it doesn't always have to be a negative self-talk thing,
Right.
where that gray style needs to get adjusted. I had to have a conversation with one of my clients just in the past week. I'm like, oh yeah, it was a learning week for me. And I'm like, look, we've been doing this a long time. You know that you're not learning anything new by making these same choices. Like, we're just making these same choices. So I'm all about having learning weeks. I'm all about like it being a positive thing, but this is not what this week was. This week was you made choices that did not benefit the goal or or the value that you're telling me that you have. And so if that's what we're doing, let's at least own it. Let's at least be like, yeah, I just didn't do it this week. All right, cool. Like there's some peace and some comfort in that. But don't think that it just has to be like, I beat myself up. I suck so bad this week. Be like, it just didn't happen this week. I learned a lot. If you don't know, then great, let's learn. But if you know, let's not give ourselves that too much grace on that,
Well, it becomes like the same thing kind of across the board, right? Where it's like we start putting low effort into certain areas of life. And then when it comes even to like our grace or the way that we're searching for it becomes a bit more low effort too. And it's like, I mean, it was Monday, they're hard. So I didn't. And it's like, wait, what? Like, what happened with the day that, even that becomes more like surface level. And sometimes that can mean too, though, that maybe we're just in like a rut and maybe we need to figure some shit out and switch it around. But I mean, like 9 times out of 10, I'm going to take a situation like that and I'm going to find a place for you to put more effort in and like build a new street that we're going down. If that means that we're on the wrong one, then like, let's find something else. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of like idle hands. And so and especially with like coaching, right? Like if somebody's putting in the time and the effort and the money to have a coach, for the most part, like to feel like I'm doing my job, I'm going to help them try to find like something that we're continuing to work on. And it doesn't mean that we're always finding something new, even like physically or whatever, but maybe we pivot towards like now we're reading more, or we're working on sleep, or like we're working on something different. But it might just mean you need a shakeup. But like the big thing for me is that you have to put the effort in either way, even if we're giving grace, and then being more honest with yourself with like the communication piece. Because a lot of times I think if people are they're gracing their life. It's just an all around effort to not put in the effort, where it's like, well, I just know I'm just going to give it to myself, and we're giving like a big break. And then we probably need to figure out why feel like we need such a big one.
Yeah. I think another thing I try to tactfully call my clients out with is complaining. Like if there's complaining about something, but we are causing the issue ourselves, then I don't want to hear about it. Like, I don't want you to complain about the same thing over and over again, because it's exhausting to me. If it's exhausting for me to read and hear, then it's exhausting for you. And you need to get off that hamster wheel, and like, you are kind of enabling yourself to be in that exhaustive habit loop. So if we're complaining about it, are we in control of that situation? Like, what can we control in that situation? What variables are we actually like enabling to have that complaint exist? And like, can we change it? Because I have been in that rut. Like, me complaining, like a simple thing is my mother-in-law. I love my mother-in-law. I don't have the greatest open relationship with her. I complain about it all the time, but I'm not doing any actionable things to correct it. So like, what am I just going to complain for the rest of my life? Because that's nauseating for the people around me, to include myself, where I don't even want to hear myself anymore. So I better take action steps to make changes, so I don't have to like complain about the same shit over and over and over again.
Are you guys planning for the holidays? And that's why that one came right off the top of your head.
Yes.
Side note, you don't have to complain for the rest of your life, right?
Just the rest of theirs.
Sorry. I love my mother-in-law. She's wonderful.
I love my mother-in-law. I love my mother-in-law. We are very different personalities.
For
Same.
sure.
I love
Same.
my mother-in-law, and she truly, I think, is like so guided by trying to like be kind and stuff. But we're just very different. And I'm much more like upfront and just like, can we not waste time on this? Like, and get to the
Same.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I'm
people
very...
earn being mean to them, Sometimes
What?
people, I feel like they work for it. And like, I'm going to do these things. Can you please be mean to me finally? I'm like, yeah, I got you.
I feel like I am such a big communicator, and I don't like when people are very surface. I just can't do. It is like a visceral reaction inside of me where I'm like, I don't know how to play this game. Like, I have no idea how to do it. That like, I can't be so surface. It doesn't work for me. So like, get to like the shit. Like, get to the...
And then
if you
people
have
think
an
we're
issue,
the weirdos.
like what?
This is why you like us, because we're ADHD and we overshare.
Right. We're like, let's get to it. What do you want to talk about? What door you want to open?
Which trauma are we experiencing today, Danica?
I'm not into the like, hi,
Something
how
comes
are
up
you?
and we light up. We're like, we could talk about that.
All right.
Yeah.
So back to like real stuff. I
Yeah,
also
great.
like doing the risk reward stuff, right?
Hmm.
So like, what are we risking by the actions we're taking or the things that we're doing? Okay. So if we're giving ourselves grace, what is the risk of us giving ourselves grace in this situation? Is it that we keep making the same decisions? Is that even a thing? Like, because if it was something that truly happened to us and not by us, if we give ourselves grace in there, then the risk is probably, okay, we don't have to carry this around and keep this with us,
Right.
and continue to deal with the same situation. Because I feel like that's what the lack of grace does, is it forces us into this constant thinking about that situation,
Yeah.
having that negative connotation in our brain, and then that kind of fosters into other things. And so it kind of like, it poisons other stuff because we're continually thinking about this thing, right? Like, have you ever had like, we talked about having shame earlier. You ever had an embarrassing situation happen? And anytime that like something similar to that situation starts coming up, you start thinking about that embarrassing situation, and then you start feeling bad, and then you start feeling anxious, and now you're acting differently than you would normally. And now that's having an impact on the next situation, and the next situation, that are completely different situations from the other one. And I feel like that's what too much of a lack of grace does, is it creates that anxiety in those situations and with those things of, oh, but no, I don't have power over this. Like, and that can go to things that we do have control over too. Oh, it was somebody's birthday. Well, I don't have power over that fact that it's their birthday. I have to have a slice of cake with them. I don't have power over this. And so it's this weird thing where it starts affecting other things when it doesn't need to. And if we can like turn that grace knob up on things that aren't actually our thing, we can say, okay, what is the risk there? Is it nothing? Is it that I'm going to put on more weight? Is it, that there's going to be some other kind of negative consequence of it? Okay, so what's the reward of it then? Right? So if the risk is low and the reward outweighs that, then that's probably something we should be considering. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to do, to look at, to take that step back, and maybe you need to write it down, do a pros and cons list, whatever, and look at that and say, all right, well, I've always been against this action or this thought process, especially with these things. But when I put it down on paper and I put risk rewards in there, there's a lot more rewards than risks.
Mm.
So why am I so afraid of this, or why am I letting this impact me so much? And how can I start working my way into saying, okay, yeah, maybe I have been giving myself too much grace here. Or maybe in these other situations, I've been way too hard on myself.
Yeah, I love that, writing it down. I'll do that with some of the clients that I work with that do struggle with like disordered eating or body image disturbances, or kind of that all or nothing or black or white kind of mentality. I'll have them write down the areas of their life that they're feeling a little challenged by, whether that be like nutrition, workouts, body. And then I'll say, like, how much grace are we giving and how much pressure are we giving, like on a scale from 1 to 10, your grace level and then your pressure level. And could we kind of adjust those levels if like those are our areas of challenge? So say it is food where people are very like restrictive and like they only like, but it's making them miserable. It's not enjoyable. Their relationship with food is not good or not healthy. Then we'll probably look at it and like the pressure is at a 10, the grace is at like a 0, and like could we just slide it a little bit more to see like could we give just like maybe a 2 grace for now and try that out, see how it feels, and take the pressure down a little bit more and see how that feels for a few weeks, like try it out. Because like I said, everybody is different, and I do think it is important to look at like your pros and cons list, your risk, your reward, to figure out like, is this working for me right now where it's at, or is it not?
Do you have like tools that you offer them to try and like, if they catch themselves in like a pressure or like shame spiral with stuff, how do you get them to try and like recognize and like pull out of that?
So first is like the awareness of it, like what is the cue or what is the area in which they feel like they have like, let's just say it's like pressurized, like perfectionism, or like they get down on themselves. They're not giving themselves any healthy grace whatsoever. Then if we have like an area, usually there's like an environmental factor, there's usually an emotion involved, and there's usually like an actual variable, like something, whether it's food or workouts or something like that. And so then I'll say, okay, since we kind of are aware of where the environment is and where we're triggered by this or where this comes up often, if we use like the 3 C's of like catch, challenge, change. So in that moment, we just bring our conscious mind on board, we catch it, and then we challenge it immediately, and then we have to shift. So we use the 3 C's. Another thing that I remind them of is like your 5 seconds before like a habit loop will come into board. So like you have 5 seconds to make that decision. If you know, so say for instance, with people that really struggle with like restrictive eating, sometimes it's even difficult. Like there might be a visceral reaction where like they're eating the food, but they don't want to swallow it. And so they'll have that inside of them. And it's like a habit loop that kicks up where like they start to get anxious. So I'll say, give it 5 seconds. You have 5 seconds to change that. So you feel it, you say, okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, swallow, done, over with. Like now we can shift and we can go in a different direction. If we continue to kind of do that over and over again, we're breaking the cyclic pattern of whether it's thoughts, whether it's actions, like behaviors. So we're breaking those patterns up and kind of taking away like the glue of those patterns or those like programmings that were there, and we're building new ones. So it's those 2 are pretty big for me. And then I give them like a habit checker. And that's also like a thought pattern habit checker where like they can do it weekly, they could do it monthly, but I want them to track like how much did I engage in this thought pattern, so that it brings like awareness of how frequently am I actually thinking about this or doing this or shaming myself or giving myself grace, whatever it might be, you are tracking it. And then you have this visual of like either, oh, fuck, like I got to do some work. I want to change this, or like, okay, like I'm progressing, whatever it may be. But that visual helps them to realize that like whether they have areas that they want to progress in, or we can reflect and be like, look at like before you were like a level 10 on pressure, and now this past week you've been around like a 5-6. Like that's really interesting. What have you been doing differently? Or like tell me what has been your surroundings, or how have you been feeling overall? So those are like, I know I mentioned 3 different things, but those are the tools that I typically access and want them to report back on.
I like the visual because I've worked with a lot of very high level successful people, and those people are dead into it. And I always like kind of liken it to the dog smell in a house if you have dogs. If somebody that doesn't have dogs comes in your house, like, oh, your house kind of smells like dogs a little bit. Because no matter how clean you get it, it always still kind of smells like dogs a little bit. But I don't notice that. And so it's one of those things where like you're like, oh well, if it's affecting me that much, I would know. I would feel that. And I'm like, well, would you though? Because if it's been happening for years and it's a daily occurrence, the way that you perceive that can just be gone. And you don't
That's
even
your normal.
recognize it. Right.
Yeah.
You know? So it's definitely, it can be very eye-opening sometimes to do that thing. Because for me, when I hear about like, oh, I'm gonna write it down, I'm like, that sounds dumb. That sounds dumb. I'm masculine, okay? No, I'm not writing down my feelings.
That's too
And then
girly.
for sure. And then if I actually do it, I'm like, oh shit, I'm an asshole to myself. Like, or like if you write down some of the thoughts that you have about yourself, and then you put it in the context of if somebody else said that to me, I would probably punch them straight in the face. Like we would have a problem. We'd be fighting. And then you got to take that step back, but oh, but shit, I say that to myself all the time.
Right.
Yeah, that is. So I also, there's an app where I have to like look back on what it's called, but it's like an emotion act, and it tings you throughout the day. So if I know like if a client has like they report that like I am always anxious or I'm always sad, like I've noticed that I've just been sad or lonely, or so those are, I want them to be able to track for a little bit the frequency of like those feelings that they're having. So this app has them track their feelings, but my thing is I also want them, the feeling that we're like challenged by or feeling like an abundance of, that's wonderful that we're bringing awareness to it, but I need you to also, I want you to focus on when you're happy. I want you to focus on when you're content, when you are feeling like proud of yourself. Like I need you to be able to, because you're really in tuned with like the negative right now. I need you to realize that like you have some positives that are coming in too. You're just not seeing them. They're kind of like in the background, being like sheltered or somewhere else. You stuffed them down, and we need to bring them back to the surface because they exist. So that helps people to recognize like their mood. And then we talk about that. So that app is it's brought a lot of awareness to some of my clients because it also gives more feelings than just like sad, mad, angry, happy.
Yeah. Can you send, if you happen to have like a link for that, I can put it in our show notes. In case people want to pull that up. Yeah, that made me think like, I think like last week I was thinking about how I wanted to start doing something. I'm not going to be like a big journal person. Like, I don't know that I could sit and like, dear diary, and like write my whole day or something. But years ago, we used to do like the wins and I forget, not losses, but essentially wins and losses, like for the week. We would talk about those here on the podcast. And I thought about almost just doing that for myself each day, because what I have done for myself in the past, and I'll recommend it to clients that maybe they're having trouble sleeping. And like, I struggle with anticipatory anxiety a lot, where, I mean, anxiety in general is anticipation, but like taking it to the whole max. And like, I won't be able to shut my brain down if I'm just sitting there, like, cause I will start to just think about absolutely everything that can go wrong so that I can try and game plan for all of it. And if I write it down, like before bed, whatever the thing is that like immediately comes to mind that's driving me fucking crazy, I will try to write those down and just be like those are tomorrow's problems. Like I don't have time for that right now. And I like, this is going to be my list that I'm going to freak out about tomorrow. And kind of like, I thought about pivoting it to give myself that reminder of like, because the last like month of my training and my taper and stuff was just a mess. And so I didn't like, I was checking boxes, but I didn't feel like they were great. And so for myself, I'm like, well, you're so dumb and everything's wrong if you're not doing it right. And so like, I should start doing that where it's like, okay, well, the wins were boxes were checked. Like losses could be, I don't know, maybe I could have organized my day better or stuff. And like, I started doing it more mentally because I am actually trying to get away from tracking so much in my life. And so like little things, little changes that have made a huge impact that were like hard for me to go ahead with. Like the silliest one is taking the kids to school. And so that's a huge stressor for me. I hate getting my kids out the door, loading everyone into the car, listening to them all argue the entire way to school. Then I'm like sad to see them go. Then I'm rushing to get like to the rest of my day and things aren't happening. And because it's a half an hour drive one way, it eats up a huge portion of the morning. So Vic was like, I can do that. Like, I'd be happy to take that over and like, you can stay home and have that time. And the first time we did that, I think that was the first time I had been 100% alone in the house, like since having Claire. And it was like, oh, this is new. Like no one's talking to me. And then it sounds so silly, but literally just tidying up the house. Like I'll find myself wanting to go pick up the kids' rooms for them. And I'm just like, huh, silly kids, and like cleaning up after them and stuff. But it changed like a significant portion of my day and like how I wanted to attack literally everything else, from like workouts not feeling like as much of a chore and like different stuff, because I made the start of my day a little bit easier. And it was one of those things where I like was beating myself like I was a bad mom if I'm not like the last parental face they see before they walk in. And it's so silly. Like they're not holding that against me. They probably think the mom who yells at them like the whole way to school, she's pretty shitty. And so like we were able to like fix that a little bit. And so sometimes it's things that you don't think they're going to translate over into what you want them to fix. But like that was able to take me from my workouts feeling like a chore that I had to cross off the list to being excited about them again, because it wasn't jam-packed in the middle of like a million different things. Mm-hmm. And so the grace can come in a lot of different ways. It can be saying it's okay if you don't do that, or saying I need to rearrange my shit so my life works a little bit better. But like just finding where you can fit that in for yourself.
Yeah, I did the circle challenge with my clients. So you draw a circle, you put all the shit that's going on in your mind inside the circle. And I know. Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't muted. Normally they can't hear me make these noises.
As big as you want the circle. And then you can only highlight the things that are like detrimental, must be done, like needed, and the other shit needs to go. So like it helps you to realize how much like you can actually declutter yourself to be more productive. And that is another way to give yourself grace, right? Because if we just have it all kind of going on, like, well, I have to do this, you probably don't need to do all that. Like, You don't need to draw the fucking circle. I swore a lot on this podcast today.
You did.
I'm so proud of you.
It's because you're hanging out with us too much. And then now someone's going to get mad. We're going to have a comment where it's going to be like, you guys would sound more intelligent if you didn't say the F word or like something.
I'm not trying to sound intelligent. Duh.
I just noticed that. Anyways, when I get passionate about something, there are a few F-bombs I will kind of just throw. That's the way I am. But what I was saying was that that challenge allows us to like gain perspective of like, wait a minute, there's way too much stuff like cluttering my mind right now. And I'm putting energy into things that like, I don't need to put energy into. Yeah. It just allows another good visual of like, wow, I didn't realize I was thinking about all that stuff. And I actually only need to focus on the highlighted stuff. The one rule is you may not highlight the entire circle. It's like a non-negotiable.
You just draw around the circle.
Just like color in the whole thing.
So like for me, I think of that and I'm like, oh, I have to emotionally think about everything. But another way that you can do that is by doing a simple time log on your day. Okay, woke up at 7 a.m., fed the dogs and let them out from 7 to 7:20 a.m., cooked breakfast from 7:20 to 7:40, ate breakfast from 7:40 to 7:55, left the house at 8 for work, whatever. And literally just knock every single little thing that you have to do. And then you do that for 2, 3 days, you're gonna know where your time's going and what, is quote unquote important to you. Because when you look at that, you're gonna see things like, why the hell did I let that take up 15 minutes of my day? Like, why did I let this take up 10 minutes there? So it allows you to, again, take that step back, get that more objective bird's eye view and say, oh, well, these things are all very important. There's no cutting stuff out from here. Because when we talk about like the health and fitness goals, you're going to have to make time for it somewhere. So whether it's drawing your circle and figuring out what you're going to cut for the things that don't serve you or that don't benefit you or that just add negativity and stress, whether it's doing a time log and saying, oh, well, that's stupid, or why am I doing this? Or wow, how am I spending so much time on that? And being able to roll those things back in, that's how you start having more control and power over things to make those changes so that hopefully we don't feel like we have to like give ourselves that much grace. Because I definitely use the notepad next to bed as a suggestion for a lot of people so that you don't have thoughts keeping you up all night. Like, okay, cool, it's going to be there tomorrow. You're going to be able to look it up and see it tomorrow and worry about it. So let's just save that and you can stress out about that tomorrow instead of tonight. And then that way you can deal with it tomorrow and stress out of it at least on a good night's sleep.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I love that too. It also allows you to realize if your excuses are actually valid. Like if you're like, I don't have time. Well, the 2 hours that you spent scrolling, you probably could have done some things.
I'm telling you, the best thing I've done is fall head over heels into ridiculous books. Like lately, that's been the best thing for me, like to end the doom scrolling.
So by the way, I had this thought come up earlier and I lost it and now it's back. So I see all this stuff about, because you said scrolling, and like literally I know if I get into a doom scroll that can last. And we talk about how like all these people are going against TikTok with these lawsuits about how it's bad for children's mental health, and how like Florida just passed a law that you have to be 16 or older to have a social media account because of the detriment it does to mental health for kids. And then I'm like, okay, because I feel like the grace thing impacts this, right? Because the social media impacts our expectations of ourselves and our lives and what we expect those things to look like and how they should go. But very rarely do we actually like take that as a consideration, being like, okay, well, are my expectations of myself and what I'm seeing as realistic or not realistic being impacted by a bunch of things that are outside of my life? Because social media is outside your life. That's a bunch of other people's lives, or at least what they want you to think their lives are. And then being able to get rid of that possible impactor for misinterpretation and then start actually being realistic about, okay, where are my excuses? Where are the things that I can't control? And how can I align things better for what's actually my life that's happening? Because I do feel like a lot of adults, we take for granted, or we don't really recognize the fact that hey, if it's bad for kids, it's probably bad for adults too. And if it's having a negative impact on them, it's probably also having a negative impact on us. We're just old enough to be able to make that decision for ourselves.
Yeah, or we say that we are, but then a lot of people are like, it's like people stop caring as much, I mean, we've talked about stuff before where it's like people can make changes like when they're pregnant, and then when they're not anymore, they're like, well, I just can't stop this habit. And it's like, well, you didn't for 10 months then, and so it's like when you become an adult, they're like, well, you're on your own now. I don't know. See if it works out for you. Doom scroll all day long. We're not going to make rules about it. And I mean, you do have to take that like personal responsibility, which, and it just comes back to being honest and paying attention to shit. Like we talked a lot today. What I thought was funny was like, we mentioned like I'm not tracking. Danica mentioned not tracking as much. We mentioned giving yourself grace and like that kind of stuff and getting there. But the reason we've been able to get to these places is because we spent a lot of time on the other end, like getting there and learning it and getting used to it and stuff, and not giving ourselves the grace to not do it, maybe being at the other end of like slightly neurotic spectrums of it and stuff.
100%.
And then come back. And I think a part of that you kind of have to go through yourself. Like when you jump into these things, go full steam ahead, take it on, make it part of your personality, run with it. And like, if it sticks, cool. Make sure you don't do any damage to yourself, like try not to,
Right.
try to keep it on the healthy side of things. If you take on something like that and it doesn't stick, then get out of it. Like get
Yeah.
out and find something different. Don't force yourself like a square peg into a round hole and
Mhm.
just try to make it work, because there's just so many other ways, whether it's fitness, health, keeping your mindset like in a good place. There's so many other ways that we can try and make it happen. And if we have an understanding of where you're at, it just makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, that self-exploration or like the going through the yuck first will, I know there's a lot of people that will be like, I don't understand, like, but how did you get there? And like, why can't I just get there? Like, why can't I just get to where all my dials are great and all of like my, like where I put my energy is fantastic? It doesn't typically happen like that. Like you kind of have to fuck up a little bit and like feel the muddiness of it in order to learn from it, in order to then reflect and then make adjustments from there. Like, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to like suffer to the nth degree. Like that's not what I'm saying. But there has to be a little bit of trudging through the mud in order for you to have insight gained and then know how it works best for you.
Yep.
I was gonna say, I don't think that place exists. Like, I think we like to think that that place exists where everything's perfect and everything's good and all the dials are right. But like, and this is, I think, part of how social media is just a dopamine hit, right? It's
Right.
just constant dopamine nonsense. So like, we also have to understand, like, we can't have this expectation. Like, life isn't supposed to be perfect. Not everything's supposed to make us happy. Some things are going to be more challenging than others. Some things are going to be no challenge at all. And like, you have to be ready for the fact that even if you're in a really good spot, it doesn't mean life's perfect. It
Right.
doesn't mean everything is this huge joyous occasion. Like there's still going to be stuff that is good that still sucks. Like that weird conundrum, right? Like, all right, this is good. I know this is good for me, but it sucks. I don't really like doing it. But hey, here we are. And that is part of what makes life good and fulfilling and like helps me to find that joy out of
Yeah.
it, right?
I think I said this in like, well, maybe a couple of podcasts, but also at my presentation, like there should not be balance, but there could be harmony with everything. And there could be like, you can navigate through things a little bit better than what you're doing right now. And that's just improvement on the access of tools that you have and being able to know how to use your tools. Like, it doesn't mean that everything is going to be hunky dory and like smooth sailing. It means that you're probably going to sell a little bit better because you have more tools to use and you know how to use your tools.
I love that. That's exactly what I thought of, where it's not wanting to get to a place where everything's perfect and there's no challenge at all. But like if you're having one of those days where everything seems really hard and it's just like, man, it'd be nice to just feel well equipped, like for shit coming at you, where it's like, not everything has to stop. I just would like to be able to handle it. You get to that place. And then when it is good, it's like, and this, we could tie this back to like this is why when we reverse diet, or we don't want you to diet all the time, and we want you to get to a place where you feel resilient. Because if you're constantly getting shit on and you're not feeling like you're able to crawl out of everything, you're not sleeping, you feel anxious, you're not accomplishing, like, yeah, it's going to feel like, oh my God, I can't do anything. And if we can get to a place where we can work on like pieces of the resiliency, it's not going to get perfect, but the hits don't hurt as much. Like
yeah. And you haven't learned it yet. Like that's another place to give yourself grace. Like if you are constantly just beating yourself up, maybe it's because you haven't learned to give yourself grace yet. And so you have to learn it. You have to practice it. You have to learn it. And maybe that is how we get better. It's like we learn things. So like, don't get frustrated or angry that you're like, I don't know how to track. Well, you haven't learned yet. You haven't even tried. So like, don't get mad because the first 2 days aren't going so smooth. Like, give it a shot. Like, this is all of it is part of a growth process and a learning process. And like, I kind of want you to slip, fall, and scrape your knee. Like, I'll help you with the Neosporin application. Like, you're going to be okay. We're learning.
Yeah. You got to learn how to get to the store and get the wet wipes, you know?
Yes.
There you go. You guys got anything to close us out? Or
No, that was really well said.
I think that was good.
it is. I loved that.
I hope you guys enjoyed listening to Danika cuss a lot.
No, this is
It's my
fun.
favorite. She's so wholesome. She was like,
I love that she's
"Err."
like, guys, have you noticed? I was like, oh yeah, no, we totally have.
Well, it's funny
I
because
should have started like a tally.
my husband was here, he was listening, but he texted me and he was like, I love listening to you speak. You're very smart, passionate, and articulate. And I thought, I am a little feisty sometimes. Like, does it count when I throw F-bombs? Like, am I still that intelligent and articulate?
You got like when you learn the artful placement, yeah.
Right. I thought that they were very well applied and useful.
It's another
Look,
skill.
Impact.
I'm gonna be very honest. I think that the idea that cuss words are bad is an antiquated social norm that has been kind of falling off more and more. I think some people hold on to it, but I think the overall vibe that I get is most people don't really care. They're not offended by him anymore. It's just another word.
The good
Also,
news is,
could you imagine if we were like, oh, goodness gracious. Like, I just feel like it doesn't fit. Like, if I was like, well, good grief, you should probably go after your goals. Like, I feel like people would be like, huh?
she's
Like,
making fun of me.
I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it.
Jiminy Cricket. No,
Yeah.
see the good
have a
news.
gun.
This is our generation, right? And like now we're getting like older, we're like in the spotlight, right? Like hitting our like late 30s and 40s and stuff. And so because we talk this way, like it works. And then at some point, like it'll be like either the young kids talk like this or they don't. Fuck them. Like
They're saying shit like skibbity toilet now.
no, listen.
I
Everything
can't.
in my house
I'm
is
old.
Sigma. And like, and then the best part that I started following all of the people to teach me how to talk like my 6th grader. And then he gets in the car and I'll be like, get your gat in the car. Like you're acting sus. Like you got no riz, no cap. Like, oh, what did you just do? And I'm like, I know what they mean. I'm paying attention. Like,
and now you're just on the opposite side of your childhood.
I know, but it's fun making him uncomfortable while I learn how to say it all.
And now you can appreciate how your parents felt doing the same thing to us.
I'm gonna be such a cool grandma. Like I can't wait. Like that's where I'm headed. Where I'm like all the way on to like grandmahood's gonna be fucking awesome. Oh yeah. All right, guys.
All right, we gotta stop. We gotta hit stop. It's too bad. We're getting way off.
Bye.